Well, welcome to the Oklahoma Council for the Social Studies annual conference. We're glad that you could attend virtually. We hope that it was actually easier for you to attend this year since it is virtual. My name is Heather Goodenough. I am a board member and I work for Broken Arrow Public Schools. I am the secondary social studies instructional specialist as well as a middle school instructional coach. So we are super excited to talk about literacy in the social studies classroom. And we have brought a literacy design collaborative rep, Ms. Judy Commander, who is going to talk to us today. I'm going to pass it to you, Judy.
Okay, very good. Good afternoon. I echo what Heather says. I'm delighted to be here. And just something about my background. I feel very close to Oklahoma because I counted it up, and I think for the last 7 years I've worked somewhere in Oklahoma. 3.5 years with the Osage County Interlocal Collaborative with those 11 schools west and south of Bartlesville, and then for the last maybe 3.5 years, I've had the privilege to work in Broken Arrow with both content and career ed teachers around the very same idea around literacy. So we're going to get started, and I'm going to show our screen and we'll get busy. Okay, Heather, you can tell me if we're all good on the screen.
We cannot see your screen.
Okay, well, let me see. I did it to present. Okay. Let's see what I should do here. It said to present. Move it. Let me go into Zoom to share. We've already launched it. Let me see. All right, let me share screen now. There we go. So Chrome.
There we go.
Okay. Sorry, group. Took me a minute. All right, here we go. So we're going to talk a bit today around literacy in the social studies classroom. But looking at the title, I want to just make a couple of statements before we begin. So it's one thing to say, oh yes, I have my kids read. Oh yes, my kids talk. My kids are writing as a way to learn social studies. But we want to use the lens in thinking about intentionally creating quality literacy opportunities for the purpose of advancing student content understanding. So that's one part. Second part is, so how are we going to define quality? What makes a literacy task write something versus a quality literacy opportunity? And that is defined for us in this presentation, that the work that we receive from a quality literacy strategy is going to offer us an insight into the level of content learning for that student or those groups of students, so that we know what our next steps are going to be. Who needs more, who is struggling, who can move on, and how are we going to approach it? So if we're looking then at this picture, I want to make this point. It's impossible to talk about disciplinary literacy strategies without having actual disciplinary content. So while we're going to use a unique content to talk about literacy strategies, what we're talking about can be used within content and probably adjusted for any grade level. So I think that's important to think about. The second thing is that we're not really pushing or talking about digital versus face-to-face. The strategies that we're talking about today are ones that would move platforms easily, because what we really care about is whether the district says we're going digital or going distance learning. Nope, come back face-to-face. We want to ensure the second semester that the student learning continues. So it doesn't matter whether it's digital or face-to-face, the strategies are what we want to focus in. And the third thing I want to comment on is that some of the strategies we're talking about, I'm not going to presume are going to be new to you. You may have used every one of the strategies we talk about today, and that's terrific. That's excellent. But the piece that we would like you to consider is, as a takeaway, how can I take at least one of these strategies and use them in a unique way that I haven't thought about, or be more intentional in a sequence of literacy strategies, build a stronger content understanding for my next unit. So with that in mind, I want to move then to the next feature. So because we want to make it somewhat interactive in this 1-hour webinar, Heather, will you tell us about how we're going to do that?
Sure will. So there will be times where we will ask you to unmute and talk to one another. There will be times when we are going to use that chat feature and respond in the chat feature. There is also going to be times where you will go down to the bottom where it says reactions, and we are going to ask you to raise your hand, give us a thumbs up, so on and so forth. So we just wanted you to be aware of the Zoom interactive features so that you knew where to go when we are asking you to interact in different ways.
Okay, with that, here we go. So we're going to start with this, our lead picture. You know, because in social studies and in history, photos form a kind of authentic text. So I have to start out with this. What's happening in this picture? So if you would, just like Heather talked about, would you use the chat feature to tell us what's happening? And Heather's going to monitor that or track that for us. So if everyone, and you're not resigned to one opportunity or one little chat. So what's happening in this photograph?
We've got a couple answers. We've got that it's in Kansas. It's the Dust Bowl. It might be a fire. Somebody else is saying a cloud of dust is covering the community. Somebody said, is it a fire or train? Where's the smoke from?
Okay.
A section of town is on fire. Incoming dust storm. And then another one says, normal day about town with a cloud of something building.
Okay. Well, thank you for all of your thoughts and your curious questions, like wondering, is this happening or is something else happening? Because as teachers, all of you zeroed in on the relationship between the dust or what's covering and the fact that you anticipated something happening. But I'm going to ask you, so what if we gave students this same photo and asked them to tell us what was happening? They may be all over the place, or they may not answer because they're looking to say, well, it looks like something's in the sky. So depending on that, those answers from students might look more like Swiss cheese than the coherent kinds of responses you gave. So if we wanted the same kind of coherent responses from students, we may have to go to another level, which is what we're going to look at now. So we can certainly present students authentic photographs as text and say what's happening, let's talk about it, let's read about it. But we want to build that strategic thinking from students. So we may approach a photograph with a sort of a double hit, two strategies. So it is in the National Archives work that you have as part of your Oklahoma Social Studies resources to take a photograph and to mark it off in quadrants so that we're focusing attention on a particular aspect of the photograph, and then we'll reconstruct it and put it back together. But in order to do that, we also are going to streamline student thinking about the photograph by adding a see, think, wonder strategy. And in essence, it's simply in a quadrant, what do you see? You can even say, I see. What do you think is happening? As we heard several of you give some of those ideas, but the curiosity and therefore the engagement comes from, so what do I wonder is happening? And several of you made some of those statements. So I'm going to ask you, if we were face to face and not recording, we would be in breakout groups or small groups, and a quadrant would be assigned to each small group or each partnership to answer those questions and report back. And then we would reconstruct all the details, since details are one of the very most important things in terms of building that reading comprehension. But for today, not being able to go into a Zoom breakout room, I'm going to ask Heather to go through the quadrants, applying the See, Think, Wonder strategy. And I want you to think in terms of your level of agreement to what you hear Heather say based on your findings. So Heather, would you try it for us?
So in quadrant number 1, I see a big cloud and wonder. I think about how I see it coming into the city, and I wonder, why is this cloud, why is one part of the cloud darker than the other clouds? I'm going to move to quadrant 2, and I see a bunch of cars. Makes me think that this is an older year. And I wonder, what year could this be? I also wonder, is that a dirt road or a paved road? So then I move to quadrant 3, and again, I see more cars and a sidewalk. And I think
It's okay.
how many people, I think about the people who are walking outside, and I wonder how many people drive the cars and how many people walk around. Then I move into quadrant 4, and I see different business signs. And I think this is probably a downtown area of some sort. And I wonder which town that this picture may have come from.
Okay, thank you, Heather. So with the thumbs up, how many of you, like, weigh in? How many of you found details with See, Think, and Wonder with any of the quadrants similar to what Heather identified? If you, okay, I see a thumbs up. You can also use the thumbs up feature in Zoom if you want to. Let's see if that works. We don't have to. There we go. Okay. Well, I'm going to see that I saw several thumbs up. The important thing is that we have some things that we're wondering about, and by using this quadrant strategy and the See and pairing it with See, Think, and Wonder, we're set up to have a basic understanding or a concept about information that as we build more. Oh, I see it. There you go, Natalie. Very good. Thank you. As we build more information from what we're getting ready to read, or a video we're getting ready to see that's going to give us an overview of this, that we can come back to this photograph and then put more sense to it and possibly work with our wonder questions. So as a side note, the See, Think, and Wonder questions would be worthwhile capturing somewhere, either a Jamboard or some kind of the student notebooks, an organizer. And so even if we listed the wonders up on the board, if we were face to face, and as we proceed through this unit of study, we would want to come back and address those wonder questions with information as we build our understanding. So speaking of that, when we finish this picture, we would see, and this is around the Dust Bowl, obviously, we would see a video, we'd be ready to read because students will have built some concept about the information. And so they'll be ready to see a video or read a text that we're providing an organizer for them to lift more information. But we've got to stop at this point and find out, so what do we know now about the Dust Bowl? And so one of the ways, rather than giving questions or asking some students what all this means, what the significance is, even the fact that the clouds are dark and light, and that some of the people are looking at it and others seem to be going about their business, we want to use sentence frames as a viable way of assessing student information at any point in time after reading. And notice that the because, a result of, and after that I had on the front slide are very important, because these are true history, disciplinary, introductory words, because what historians care about is the concept of it, the significance of it, the context of it. You know, it's the why it happened and how we put different events together. So the sentence frames that we give students need to follow that kind of thinking. So please, historians, your sentence frames would be much better than mine. But the point I want to make is, after some initial reading, we're going to ask students, we're guiding their thinking through the sentence frames and asking them to let us know what they have, because it's what we know about the Dust Bowl. Again, if we were in a Zoom breakout, we would go into the breakout, you would talk about it, generate that common sentence, and come back and we could share it. Or if it's face-to-face, you would do that with the group. But since we're not, we're going to pretend, we're just going to pretend that this is more like a 9th grade or 11th grade probably, but that students wrote these sentences with our sentence frames. And so actually what we have as a result of these sentences is a level of understanding, a formative assessment around their content understanding. So if there's any part of these 3 statements or any one of these statements that are not accurate, we're able to stop right now and fill in those gaps, that misconception, and clarify, because back to what evidence, you know, the students were using from the video that we may have seen or the text that we introduced that was an overview. The second thing for using these sentence frames is that our lives aren't long enough to teach students how to write. And as history teachers and social studies teachers, you know that well. So you have students write documents or write responses, you're working with writing, and sometimes get very frustrated because their writing is not at a level that you know as a history person it needs to be. So how are we going to work with that? Giving sentence frames or paragraph frames where students are reading what legitimate, accurate writing looks like that's grade appropriate is how, in doing that every week, not just occasionally, but every week, is one way that we're going to reinforce to students what accurate writing looks like in a particular history class. So once we have that content knowledge, the question for us is, okay, we've done this introductory work on the Dust Bowl unit. So where are we going now? Well, we're ready to go deeper because we know at a surface level what students know. So I'm going to give this as a next step in terms of, number 1, talking about literacy-based strategies, and number 2, about setting the tone for students using literacy to learn content that we may give. And that's the idea that we know that a student can see the target, they can meet the target. We also know that if we're going to keep students engaged over a course of a week or 3 days or 5 days or 10 days, however long our unit on the Dust Bowl might be, that we're going to have to keep coming back to something to focus them and keep them engaged. So what better task than to give them an end of unit literacy assignment so that as we break it down now, which we're getting ready to do, and that we come back to, all right, the instruction that we're going to that students are going to have, and that I'm going to be providing, is about preparing you, to be able to respond successfully to this literacy-based assignment. So I want you to notice a couple of things in the assignment, because the expectations have to be ultimately clear to students. And how are they going to get that? Here we go. They're embedded in this task. So students are going to read both primary and secondary texts, but what are they going to be reading about? They're going to be reading about the land itself, the people who remained in Oklahoma, and the people who migrated during this time from Oklahoma. And after reading and thinking about their reading, they're going to create an escape room, whether it's a digital task or a face-to-face. And I'm going to talk more about an escape room, but for right now, we're going to say they're going to create a project-based learning task in which, what are they going to do? They're going to summarize. So that's the level of thinking we want them to do. Summarize the causes and the impact of the Dust Bowl. So that's weighty. That is, but in a sentence, that's the task that over the course of the unit, we're going to be teaching for. So I'm going to pause for a minute, because when we talk about literacy in the social studies classroom, that literacy has to do with both building content and building skills for students to be strategic readers and thinkers. So my question to you is, based on this task, what is it that you're going to teach students that is going to support their successfully responding to the task? So we're going to use the chat feature again, and I want you quickly just to identify any skill or content lessons that you know automatically that you have to teach students. So Heather, will you sort of track that for us? And let's
Absolutely.
see what are the lessons that this task suggests to us.
There has been a comment that photos as primary sources are helpful as they have built-in scaffolding.
Yes, and thank you for that point. They absolutely do. So I'm going to take it as part of this. So scaffolding any other text we have in a similar way would be a kind of skill. So sequencing the task so that students are building their understanding throughout the course of the unit, from reading to thinking to writing, would probably be a very important way to arrange the literacy tasks that we build. So thank you for that comment. Anything else?
We've got cause and effect, summarizing events. You've already mentioned sequencing and modeling.
Absolutely. So all of those are vitally important. So we talk about building literacy into the social studies or history classroom, building it off the task that we're going to expect students to respond, to demonstrate their understanding over the course of the unit, and arranging those in a teachable sequence to build students' competence is a way to approach that. So the next part I want to comment on, I bet you just thought I knew the Dust Bowl and we're going to come up with these ideas. Oh, no, no, no. So when we talk about building literacy into the social studies or history classroom, where do we go first? The standards. So I chose the Dust Bowl because Heather reminded me that at 3 grades, the Dust Bowl is a unit of study that's critical for students at those particular grade levels. And as she suggested, which I really like the idea, at grade 3, it's like an appetizer. So looking at the Dust Bowl in terms of the weather and its impact on the economy of Oklahoma. When I moved to high school to 11th grade, I'm going to think of that as the dessert, because I'm adding pieces about the Dust Bowl, summarize the causes and impact, including the government's responses. And so when I look at 9th grade, it's the longest standard, but I'm going to describe the impact of the Dust Bowl. So the fact that it's taught in 3 grade levels is the reason I chose the Dust Bowl for our topic. But I want you to look at how are we going to extract from the standards, what kind of literacy task we want to use and build into our task, and therefore work from that point to plan lessons. So if you notice, what are the key verbs? At grade 3 in high school, we're going to summarize. Okay, and that's the level of thinking we want students to do. At 9th grade, which is the entree, where we're going to spend the most learning, they're going to describe that impact around the Dust Bowl. So it's impact of the Dust Bowl, and it's both describe and summarize. I'm so curious about, how do you teach about impact? Have you thought about that? It's confusing for me, because when I looked up in Webster, a synonym for impact, there was only 122 words. So impact is going to be a heavy weight that I've got to think about in terms of planning additional literacy tasks. So I want to fall back just for a minute. And I'm going to do this. I want to fall back just for a minute on the Webb's depth of knowledge that many of you may be familiar with, the DOK chart. And remember, when we talk about rigor, or when we talk about how I want, at what level I want students to think about a particular topic, then I'm talking about this depth of knowledge chart. And basically, Webb's identified, categorized 4 levels of thinking. So I want you to look at something curious. At grade 3 in high school, I'm asking students to summarize which their skills, using their skills and concepts about the Dust Bowl, and I'm asking them primarily to engage in tasks that have more than one step to them. So to compare things, to organize things, to summarize, which is what we're talking about, takes a series of steps. So when we talk about teaching kids, and you're absolutely accurate who said that, I've got to teach and model how to summarize. I want to make sure that I'm showing students a series of steps to summarize, not assigning summarizing. But here's the curious thing. At grade 9, which is the heavy duty, the entree, teaching kids the most information about the Dust Bowl, I'm asking students to describe the impact. If you notice, describe is not even a word in the DOK. It's center in terms of with it, describe, explain, or interpret, because depending on what the task and the kind of thinking I want students to do, it could be a level 1, it could be a level 2, 3, but for us, it's a level 4, because I'm going to ask students to think about the topic, the impact of the Dust Bowl, over time, the course of the unit, from several different perspectives, in order to try and describe what that impact was. And that's why that 9th grade standard was so long, because each of those points would be a perspective that we would need to address in order for students to accurately describe the impact. So I wanted to bring that to you in terms of ways you can think about applying or determining what literacy strategies you want to use. So from that point, I want to go here. So if we're going to talk about the impact of the Dust Bowl, how do we do that? As I said, 122 words. So to give a definition of impact, or to model something around impact, may or may not be enough to accurately teach our students what we're talking about. We also know, in social studies, teachers do a beautiful job of this. They know the importance of word study. That is the unit vocabulary. Students have to understand the history academic terms if indeed they're going to be expected to read primary and secondary sources. And so we know that for whatever words that we pre-teach for the vocabulary, there are that many more that we don't teach that students need to know as they get into the actual reading. So I want to suggest a literacy strategy that addresses two pieces that students have trouble working with when we ask them to read independently, whether it's with a partner or by themselves. And that is reading the details and doing a close reading in which they could paraphrase before they even summarize, and to the right-hand column, really get a handle on the vocabulary, the words that are used, and being accurate in terms of using those words. So in this particular strategy, you take an excerpt of a text. I use this particular text about Oklahoma. It was from 1979, but it was about the Southern Plains in the 1930s. And I would, if I were actually doing this strategy, it would be a longer passage. But for the to show it on the screen, I took just a short paragraph, and I divided that paragraph into sentences. So I chunked it into 3 chunks. And so what students are going to do for each of the chunks, work on the right-hand column and on the left-hand column. So I'm going to ask them to go to the right-hand column first, but I'm giving them some clues about the words. So any words that are in bold, I've pre-taught, and the students have their vocabulary chart, either because I did a couple of vocabulary strategies, or because I gave them the definition of these words because I knew it was out of their comfort zone, and I explained them. But we've done something ahead of time with these words, and they have access to the meaning of those words that are bold. The words that are in italics, such as in sentence 2 and sentence 3, I'm going to expect them to use accurately context clues in the passage. And we know that we have assigned that as a way for students to build vocabulary for a very long time, probably since 3rd grade. Use your context clues. The problem is that the students who do use context clues successfully don't know why. They just know it works and they keep doing what they do. For students who do not know how to find a context clue in a passage and can't guess from the context, for us assigning them to use context clues really doesn't help them. So this is where one of the strategies that you identified earlier, teacher modeling, comes very handy. So I want to look at sentence 2, and I didn't write in the right-hand column yet, but students actually would fill in both of these columns. So because sentence 2 has italicized words, students know they're going to have to use context clues. So the first thing they're going to do is paraphrase that sentence. So this student said, farmers damage their farmland with plows. So I might think, great, boy, he can read. He's got that down pat. However, the litmus for a paraphrase is it accurate and is it complete? And in this case, the student did the first part, comma, but that little word but that is so important for the overall understanding of the sentence and what follows the but, he didn't do anything with. So this is an opportunity to come back and use that context clue as an opportunity to finish the paraphrase. So we speak of farmers and plows on the plains and the damage they did. Farmers with plows did damage. It says, but the language is inadequate. So how do I begin talking about this word inadequate? Because I've taught, or I'm going to make the comment that the prefix in means not. So the language is not adequate. So one way to use context clues is to read the sentence and fill in my own word. So we speak of farmers and plows on the plains and the damage they did, but the language is not enough. It's not adequate. So that may be enough to go and adjust that paraphrase sentence. I may also want to go back to sentence 1 and look at those words. And even if I don't know what all the words mean, because I have the word choice, volatile, marginal, I can look at my definitions for those two words as context clues building into sentence 2. So I want to offer this as a strategy for dealing with close reading and students being accurate, strategic readers, while at the same time working on vocabulary, which is an ongoing task for all of us. So I also want to think about, and this probably is pertinent just to the 11th grade, ways that we can extend our learning about the Dust Bowl. So when we look at primary source, or it may be secondary, I would give it either, because I don't know that author. It's signed. I'd have to do some research on the cartoonist to figure out if this is a primary or a secondary text. But history has political cartoons, photographs, all kinds of visuals that become text. So I want to make sure I use every opportunity to extend learning for students in terms of this particular kinds of text. So what are ways that we might approach this political cartoon? You may have a very satisfactory way that you use and are very happy with that. And if that's the case, I say go with it. But if not, then the first thing we're going to do is apply the 4 quadrants. We're going to divide this cartoon into 4 quadrants and ask students to replicate what they've done for photographs and do a see, think, wonder strategy. But this time I might be taking notes or recording what they say, because I'm going to follow it up with some questions, or I'm going to follow it up with information that they've taken previously in a video or some kind of context that I can relate to what they may be wondering about. So we're going to have a small group discussion and a large group discussion. And at that point, what is missing in that political cartoon, I'm going to be able to fill in the misconceptions. For example, we can identify the characters, like perhaps Uncle Sam, and I'm not sure the Congress represents the complimentary person, but I also want to pay attention in that quadrant run to the hands, to the side, the head, to the comfort that both of them are in their house shoes. As I move to quadrant 2, I'm looking at all those remedies that Franklin Roosevelt brought in his New Deal remedies, and each one of those I would be a teachable moment, or students will have read, or they're going to read about the government responses in terms of different processes that were the NRA, what they stood for, the CCC. All of those were viable responses from the government. But then when I move to quadrant 4 and look at FDR and look at the patch on his head, and I know it's FDR because his hat says so, and his bag of tricks, he's the doctor here with his remedies, I'm going to go back then to quadrant 1 and look at his quote. Of course, we may have to change remedies if we don't get results. So that is a key into the impact of the New Deal policies and government responses by this particular cartoonist. So if we're going to use a cartoon, we also want to spend equal time on the cartoonist, because we're looking at that viewpoint. That's what we care about, the significant perspective or viewpoint. I know also that a typical history strategy is to label a political cartoon with irony, hyperbole, or symbolism as a way to determine the impact of the Dust Bowl. My caution is, this is obviously for high school students, but unless you have a clear formative assessment that students know hyperbole, irony, symbolism, and analogy, or if then you're going to teach what they do with several cartoons before you ask students to label, you may want to rethink use of that particular one. However, for all students using sentence frames again to address what our purpose of this cartoon is. The New Deal policies is viable and gives access to all students. So if then we model in a think aloud how to frame these details that we've seen in a sentence that begins from the standards, the impact of the New Deal policies, whatever we're going to say, are the government responses focused on. So again, by guiding students, we're more nearly going to get accurate information about what students are understanding, what students need some additional help to plan my next steps. That's what all of this is about. Where do I go next? So I want to go here. We've had an introductory set of primary source documents to build a beginning understanding about the Dust Bowl. So a great formative assessment, we're doing a digital whip because, and I'm thinking, Heather, if we can ask them to take the thumbs up icon and put it over the word or phrase that is the most important to you. So in a whip, we go around the room, no conversation. The task is, what word or phrase or sentence is the most important to you? So we put that on the table. And for me as the teacher, I have an idea about what is resonating with students, which means what they understand. And so this particular text is just a comment from a Dust Bowl survivor. And at this point, Heather, can we do that? Can everyone put the little thumbs up on what's important?
Unfortunately, it doesn't let you move the symbols on the thing.
Okay.
But I can call each person according to how they are listed on my participant list.
Well, let's see how that works. Okay.
All right. So, Abby Tanner, you are first. So what word or phrase is most important to you?
History is of value only if you learn from it.
Thank you. Shauna, I believe it's Vata.
Don't deal on the moment.
Very nice. Other Shauna.
It's important that we do the right thing by the soil and the climate.
Good. And Carrie, I know that your volume does not work, so if you want to put it in the chat, we would take that. Carrie says, take the long-term look at things.
Mm-hmm.
So that's our digital whip.
Okay. So the point is, in listening to all of these ideas, and thank you for sharing those. Of course, I forced it a bit in terms of the particular quote I took, but if we're talking about the impact of the Dust Bowl, is the lessons that we learned from going through the decade of the Dust Bowl. This statement and the important words and ideas that you took from it address that idea, that it's not about making decisions on the short term, but looking at things in the long term and doing the right thing by the soil and the climate. Because if we learn from it, that's why it's important. So so teaching about the impact, i.e. the significance of the Dust Bowl, you could get at that to generate the conversation or a review, or to make you as a transition into the next set of lessons that you're going to teach students by doing something such as this as a literacy, because it's conversation, it's, you know, academic talk in terms of a whip. So we're going to pause for a minute, because in the instruction that we worked on just now, we used this list of disciplinary literacy strategies. So 2 things I want to pay attention to. First of all, is that the literacy strategies are interconnected. That if we're working on writing, we're also addressing the language, the word study, and it's connected to what I write has to do with what I learn from reading and what I can think about and process and reflect in terms of speaking and or listening. So the 5 literacy strategies work together in terms of helping students have a deeper, richer understanding of the content topic that we're working on. So I'm not going to read this list, but I'm going to give you just a minute to look at this list of strategies and simply ask you to weigh in based on your participation and our talking about these particular strategies. Are we setting students up to really get the essence about the impact of the Dust Bowl? So if you'll use thumbs up or thumbs down, and let's see where you stand. I'm going to ask you to weigh in. And Heather, you can tell us how that works.
Down at the bottom, there are reactions, and you're welcome to use any of those reactions to share.
Okay, I'm going to pause. Did we have thumbs up or thumbs down? More of one or the other, Heather? Okay, I'm going to pause also to ask if there are any questions about any of these literacy strategies that we used. If there's a question, and if you have a question, you're welcome to put it in the chat.
And Judy, I realized I was muted when I was telling you that we have thumbs up. Not everybody has reactions.
Okay, okay.
Pardon me for that.
That's all right. That's all right. Well, I just didn't want to zoom ahead without offering an opportunity if there were any questions.
It does not appear to have any at this time.
Okay, well then I'm going to move on. Because when we talk about using literacy in the history or social studies classroom, we're talking about the reading, the writing standards, but the most important one for us is the reading standards. So in your Oklahoma curriculum, your standards for whatever unit you're teaching, you also have the history literacy standards. I want to point out the 3 that are critical importance for you to hone in on when you're planning literacy tasks for your students around reading. So we're going to look at R6, R7, and R9. And while I have sort of synthesized or simplified the language, you'll find in those 3 in your curriculum those same 3 ideas, only there'll be more words to them. So in terms of point of view, the disciplinary practices that we're talking about is this ideal of sourcing and contextualization. So not only is it a credible source, but is the source one that lends it to it being a primary source, and is it accurate as a primary source, or does it just look like a primary source? Because that has to do with how much we accept as credible the information. So do we have access to that? The second part of that is in terms of what's the context. So what is that perspective of that author, like the survivor that gave us that last little quote, the author or the cartoonist of the political cartoon, the photographer, was he someone local? Was he from far away? And, you know, how does that context or the situation of the time impact our understanding of the content itself with what we're reading and thinking about. So for R7 is that integration of information in diverse formats. So that's all about close reading. We actually did 3 readings. We saw the photograph first. I gave you the quadrants, and then I asked for you to see, think, and wonder by your, in a small group or by yourself. And then we brought it and shared it out whole group. And then we would do a similar kind of thing with the political cartoons. And so as a result of that, we used the sentence frames to sort of show our understanding of those multiple reads. And so when we use authentic text, political cartoons, photos, if we have op-eds, if we have formal official documents that would talk about something for the topic, we want to always do close reading and look at, in other words, for students to go deeper, not just to read one time or to see a video one time and answer questions and call it a day. So R9, what historians care about is the relationship among and between events that talk about the significance of the idea of that time period or of that event, that topic, that historical topic. And this wonderful word corroboration. So if you haven't taught that word to your students to talk about with every unit you're dealing with, what a great opportunity, because it's a wonderful sounding word. And in essence, it's the compare and contrast. So is the information I'm reading in document A similar to or like document B on the same topic? And if it is, okay, what do I make of that? If it isn't, how do I account for that? So this ideal of cooperation and dealing with literacy strategies around reading for that purpose are going to make our students independent, strategic thinkers beyond history, but certainly in history. So what does that tell us in terms of planning evidence-based reading and writing tasks? Well, you have so many. You're really quite lucky to be a social studies teacher in Oklahoma, because you have such rich resources from varied sources. And it's just a matter of you of going and latching onto them and using them to make your teaching of content with literacy-based reading and writing tasks very, very purposeful and meaningful and accessible for all students. So I just want to share some particular ones. If your purpose is to identify the credibility or the source and the context, you might want to try Soapstone, Hippo, or from your Natural Archives sources. There are several lessons, literacy-based lessons that deal with this purpose. If your purpose is to corroborate, compare contrast charts, not so much a Venn diagram, but the history version, the H chart, is very purposeful in terms of taking multiple texts and trying to make sense out of them. Are they saying the same thing? What text is not saying the very same thing? And what do we make of that? If our purpose is close reading, then cause and effect diagrams. For us, causes, impact, cause and effect diagram. For example, a herringbone, which looks like a fish bone, is one example, but there are many cause and effect history specific organizers. I also want to call your attention to a strategy that you probably have used but may not have used recently. And so this is a beautiful time to bring it back into the forefront, because we have to find literacy strategies to make text accessible to all students in the classroom. And the jigsaw is that strategy where we have students in small groups. We take a text and chunk it in 4 or 3 pieces. But in doing so, we're able to hand each student a chunk of the whole text that they can read and become an expert on themselves. But in reading it and sharing with the group as an expert, we build student confidence around reading, and we generate that cooperative spirit of building an understanding around a text. RAFT is a very old writing history, social studies strategy, but I want to, again, bring it to the forefront, because RAFT simply means of a text that I'm reading, I'm writing, what's the role of the writer? Who is the audience that this text is aimed for? What's the format? We would call it in English, what's the genre? So is the format an op-ed opinion piece? Is it a first person interview? So forth and so forth. And then the T for topic. So we have students who have difficulty finding the main idea. So let's start using RAFT when we ask them to read. So before the main idea, what's the topic? What is this text about? And when we get this basic information as a first step in what we have students read, we can move on then to close reading and doing other strategies are based on the reading. I want to suggest that the DBQ, that is long part of social studies for advanced students, is actually a great evidence-based reading and writing task for all students. And so I have seen many different strategies that take the DBQ and move it to more grade level accessible opportunities for all learners. And then the escape room that I mentioned. So let's think about the escape room. It has become, and I'm not talking about the real escape room. If you have been to an escape room, you know the purpose is you're given a task, a puzzle, a challenge, and an amount of time that you have to actually work yourself through rooms, doing different tasks and puzzling out certain things in order to escape, to move. And it's lots of fun. People love that for a weekend kind of thing to do. But as a learning project, escape rooms can be organized by students or for students and can run anywhere from 10 minutes to 45 minutes, can be digital or can be on paper, in which students puzzle out. It's like a gaming strategy, various pieces of documents and information in order to arrive at the right answer or the answer to the question or whatever you may have built in this particular strategy. So I totally want to recommend you're considering the use of escape room. So in closing, when we think about giving students authentic texts, as in the Dust Bowl, songs or music or art, or other than photographs, are a wonderful kind of text to give students, in this case, the impact of the Dust Bowl. So I selected just one stanza from the Woody Guthrie song, and I want to call your attention to the 2, 4, 6, the seventh line. We saw outside our windows where wheat fields they had grown was now, and I want you to look at this language, a rippling ocean of dust the wind had blown. So in that 2-line sentence, if I had students talk about the impact of the Dust Bowl, they more likely could have a sense of the impact of it that sort of complements what they saw in our first slide, the picture of the dust coming in on that Black Sunday of April 19th in 1935. It covered the fences, it covered the barns, the tractors. We loaded our jalopies, piled our families in, we rattled down the highway to never come back again, which of course is what many Oklahomans did. There were some who remained on the land, but the majority migrated. So there is much in terms of our addressing the impact of the Dust Bowl in these particular lines of the Woody Guthrie song. So I want to call to your attention, when we think about using literacy in the class, in the social studies or history classroom, we certainly don't want to forget the arts in statues or and Oklahoma has many statues and art related topics that honor the history of Oklahoma. So I want to say, if in closing, Heather, do you have any question or comment?
I currently do not have any questions. I am going to put an attendance form in the chat so that those who have attended can get their professional development credit. So you'll find that in the chat box, but otherwise we are good.
Yes. So I want to close with these two statements. So why do we want to intentionally use disciplinary literacy strategies in social studies? One purpose comes from your comprehensive literacy plan, in which it simply synthesizes. We communicate ideas about understanding the present, reflecting on the past, and seeing visions of the future, which I think is very promising. And then from our friends in Hawaii, that use intentionally using literacy to improve social studies or history achievement means that we're not only addressing their understanding at a deeper level of content, we're improving critical thinking, we're dealing with that engagement topic that is so important for us to keep students focused on the unit of study that we're dealing with. And we really want to improve vocabulary and build strong readers and writers. So in closing, Heather and I want to thank you for your active participation, and to let you know, if you want to email either of us, you see our emails and we'll be glad to answer any questions for you. And then also to tell you that all of the sources or the information that you could access in terms of replicating any of these strategies are in this source list that of course you'll have access to because you'll have the recording. So with that, I think, Heather, we're going to close.
Yes, thank you so much for everybody for coming. And Judy, thank you so much for spending your time with us.
I loved every minute